I got rinsed on taxes this year. It was no fun. We could do 20 podcast episodes on taxes. I could have a whole tax podcast. I could just talk about this all the time. I try not to. It's if you talk about taxes too much, it sounds like you're complaining. I don't like to complain. I'm going to complain a little bit today because I just got rinsed on taxes. So we all have to pay taxes. Actually, no, we don't. We don't have to pay taxes. In fact, in 2020, 61% of people did not pay taxes. Now, that number has been hovering around 50% for a while. In 2020, because of the pandemic and all the stimulus checks and stuff like that, the number of people not paying taxes went up. 61% of people did not pay taxes. Does that make you upset? You know, that 39% of the people are footing the bill for everything that goes on in this country and 61% are freeloading? Does that make you upset? We have a very peculiar tax system in this country. We do have a progressive income tax. In most countries have a progressive income tax. The more money you make, the higher the tax rate goes. And we could talk about that some other time. What is not fair about our tax code is that most people on the low end pay next to nothing or nothing. The effective tax rate for the bottom 61% of people is 0%. Don't pay any tax. And if you're wondering who the bottom 61% is, if you look at somebody at the 61st percentile, they make $90,000 a year. So the average person who makes, or household who makes $90,000 a year does not pay any tax. So I think that's kind of weird. Now let's talk about Sweden for a minute because, you know, Bernie Sanders likes Sweden. We hold up Sweden as some kind of example for taxes. So taxes are higher in Sweden. The top tax rate is 59%. The top tax rate here is in California. So if you live in California and if you're in the top tax bracket, your tax rate is give or take about 54 or 55%. So really not that far off. If you live in California, it's not that much lower than Sweden. Okay. But the bottom tax rate in Sweden is 35%. The first dollar of income you earn in Sweden is taxed at 35%. Everybody in Sweden pays taxes. Everybody chips in. Everybody rows the boat. Okay? So that's fair to me. I actually like Sweden's system better than the U.S. in some respects. Now, Sweden pays a much higher percentage in taxes of GDP than the U.S. We pay about 20% of GDP. They pay about 40% of GDP. But in Sweden, everybody pays. Everybody pays. And here, 39% of people pay. Now, people do pay payroll taxes in this country, and payroll taxes are low, right? So basically the way it works is you pay 6.2% of the first $130,000 in income. It's capped at $130,000. And that's the employee side. If you're self-employed, you also have to pay the employer side, which is another 6.2%. So basically you're paying 12.5% if you're self-employed. That's what I pay, up to $130,000, and then it stops. Okay. You also pay Medicare tax, which I think is like 1.5%. And there's no cap on that. You pay Medicare tax on all your earnings. Now, tax rates in the U.S. used to be a lot higher. They've been a lot higher in history. So at one point, income tax rates were 92%, and I think that was in the 50s. So you say, well, why don't we have 92% income tax rate? Why don't we tax these rich people? Why don't we tax them at 92%? Well, I'll explain. So back then, that only applied to a very small number of people. Those tax brackets were very, very high. So these 92% tax rates only affected 2 or 3 people with very high incomes. So our top tax rate currently is 39.6%. Actually, I think it's 37%. It just occurred to me. I think Trump lowered it to 37 and Biden never got around to raising it to 39.6. So it's 37%. And it applies to incomes over roughly $650,000. Okay. Now, $650,000 may seem like a lot of money to you, but it's kind of not. The top 1% kicks in around 500 grand. So basically you're taxing the top 1% of taxpayers at 37%. I can tell you that 37% is not exactly a low rate of tax because I pay it every year, and you throw in state income taxes and it gets close to 50%. And when you start talking about tax rates over 50%, you're just getting butt fucked. Like it's unfair. I just consider if you have to give away more than half of your money, I just consider that to be unfair. There's something wrong with that. Okay. There's not too many places in the world where people are paying more than 50%. That's actually pretty rare. And like I said, Sweden is the highest. France used to have a 75% tax rate that kicked in, I think, at €1 million. That was under Francois Hollande, and they got rid of it because it sucked. It's all about incentives, because if people can keep more of what they make, they will work harder, make more money, and end up paying more in tax. That's what we said in the 80s, the whole supply side doctrine of the 1980s, and people laugh at it, but it absolutely works. Now, I suppose we should spend some time talking about wealth taxes, because Elizabeth Warren has kind of turned into a single issue crank. All she talks about is wealth taxes. So let's talk about wealth taxes. I think it's a dumb idea. It's a dumb idea in principle, but more to the point, it's dumber in implementation. The reason people talk about this is because sometimes rich people have lower tax rates than not poor people, but affluent people. Okay. It's the whole thing with Warren Buffett and his secretary. Warren Buffett said he had a lower tax rate than his secretary. Well, he didn't mention that his secretary makes $500,000 a year. But his secretary was basically paying top income tax rates, and Warren Buffett was making most of his money off dividends, and dividends are taxed at 23.8%, so he had a lower tax rate than his secretary. So a lot of people didn't know that his secretary makes $500 grand a year, and he was deliberately evasive about that, and there you go. So... but it's true. Sometimes rich people pay lower tax rates than people with lower incomes. It's true. It happens sometimes. And it's because rich people are not getting their income from a job. Okay. They don't have a W-2. They're not an employee. They usually own a business, and the business kicks off dividends, and they're making money off the dividends, which are taxed at a lower rate. So they pay less in taxes. So then you ask the question, why are we taxing dividends at a lower rate? Well, two reasons. One, because we want to encourage stock ownership. We want people to buy stocks and invest, so we reward them with a lower tax rate on dividends. And two, because we want to encourage companies to pay dividends. Okay? So those tax rates are lower for a reason. Now, I could make the argument that we could have zero dividend taxes, because that income is already taxed at the corporate level, and when you tax dividends, it's actually taxed twice. But that's a topic for another time. So because these rich people are paying lower taxes and we can't raise income taxes on them, the idea is we're going to tax them some other way, and we should have wealth taxes. So a wealth tax is when you add up someone's assets, their cash, their stocks, their bonds, their house, boats, land, businesses, all their assets, and then you apply a small tax to it, like 1 or 2%. So if somebody's worth $1 billion with all their assets added up, then they might pay 10 or 20 million in wealth taxes. Okay. All right, here's where things get tricky. You have to have estimates of what all this stuff is worth. Now, cash is easy. You know how much cash someone has. Stocks and bonds are easy. What about land? Need to get an appraisal on the land. What about a private business that's not publicly traded? You don't know what it's worth. You need to get someone to value the business. So the idea here is that the IRS is going to hire hundreds of thousands of people to go around and do all these appraisals on land and businesses and houses and stuff like that. Good luck. And then their estimates are going to be high because they want to collect more in tax. So the taxpayers are going to sue the government with their own appraisals. And it's going to get tied up in court for 10 years, and the government is going to spend more money trying to collect the tax than the actual amount they will collect in tax. And that's exactly what happened in France. France had a wealth tax, and it got bogged down in the courts, and they spent more money trying to collect the tax than the actual amount they collected in tax. And there's been a handful of countries that have had wealth taxes, and about half of them have gotten rid of it. including Sweden. Sweden got rid of their wealth tax because it didn't work. It was impossible. Also, think of this scenario. Somebody's worth $100 million and it's all in a private business. So they have to pay a wealth tax on the private business, but they don't have any cash. They don't have any stocks or bonds to sell. It's just all in the business. So how are they going to sell 10% of the business to raise cash to pay the tax? It's impossible. So the whole thing is stupid. And don't cheat on your taxes because it's very bad news if you do. I've actually heard from some people that IRS audits aren't too bad. Like it's not the end of the world. And I really do not live in fear of getting an IRS audit. I don't know what they would audit me with. I have like zero deductions. My profit margins are like 90%. I'm definitely not hiding any income. So I knew a guy that got audited. He had to pay $7,000, and he was just being a little aggressive on the deductions. But yeah, I got butt fucked on the taxes this year. Had to write a big check. No fun. But I did have a good year, right? And I guess that's the reward for having a good year is paying lots of taxes. It's more than I thought. By the way, under the Trump administration, audits fell to a record low. The percentage of returns that were being audited went to like 0.46% or something like that, which is good because the vast majority of people in this country are not cheating on their taxes. People are honest. Thanks for listening to the Be Smart podcast. I'm Jared Dillian. See you next time.